Go, please.
Good afternoon from Beijing. Thanks for joining today's webinar. I'd like to welcome you to our discussion of challenges and opportunities of world migration, and most importantly, the official launch of the 2020 World Migration Report, the Chinese edition. My name is Martin Geiger, and I'm honored to chair and moderate this meeting. This event is co-hosted and organized by the Center for China and IOM, who helped organizing this event. CCG, the Center for China and Globalization, is a leading non-governmental think tank based in Beijing. The International Organization for Migration is the leading intergovernmental organization on migration in the world. It recently joined the UN as a related organization and is now the UN's migration agency. CCG and IOM have worked for the fourth time already to make IOM's flagship publication, the World Migration Report, available in Chinese language. I'd like to thank the team at the IOM Beijing and at CCG around Xiao Shen and other people to translate this important report. It's my pleasure to be joined today by Dr. Henry Wang, President and founder of Centers for China and Globalization, and Dr. Giuseppe Rossetti, the representative of IOM in Beijing. Following both gentlemen's welcome remarks, the World Migration Report will be officially introduced to us by Dr. Mary McAuliffe, who is the head of the Migration Policy Research Division of IOM headquarters in Geneva. We have then in the following a panel, including 4 distinguished expert panelists, following by question and answers. In the interest of time, I will wear my Swiss-German watch today. I would like to ask everyone to keep contributions brief and sharp so that we have enough time for discussion and Q&A. I'd like to hand over now and give the word directly to Dr. Henry Wang, the president and founder of CCG, to provide him his welcome remarks. Please, Henry, go ahead.
Okay, great. Thanks, Martin. Dear Mr. Rossetti and Dr. Manuel, and also Professor Geiger, and of course distinguished guests, and also our live audience. So we have many live audience online as well through broadcasting on several outlets, social media in China. And good afternoon, good morning, and good evening also. So it's really a great honor, and we had this opportunity to work with IOM UN and also Carleton University to co-organize this event, which we're going to have the honor of Dr. Manuel to give us the presentation of World Migration Report, which is a flagship report that has been really very famous in the world. So it's not the first time to be introduced in China. As Martin said, this is already our 4th time to introduce IOM report to China, which is getting more and more attention. So we have actually seen the world has stepped into the 3rd decades of the 21st century. Of course, development of the globalization, and also after the experience of the flow of goods and capital, and now we are actually seeing explosive growth of a development opportunity for the mobility of the population, and also what has happened in China in the last 4 decades. We have 3 million migrant workers actually has transformed China, and we can see how migration has contributed to the development of China, and also certainly there's over 1 billion migrants around the world has also contributed significantly to the world. So we are very pleased to have this webinar to share this flagship report of the IOM, so that we can promote a safe, orderly, and regular migration. That has been the consensus of the IOM and also many countries in the world. So the World Migration Report is of course IOM's flagship publication. It covers the latest data, trends, and Global Migration, as also the concerns, solutions, and best practices in migration governance. We found that this has been getting more and more attention in China, and has been really a great academic, and a lot of work has been put into this report, and we have really learned a lot. And also through the process of translating into Chinese, we find that it's really very, very stimulating, and also very enriching, and also very helpful to the Chinese academics and policymakers and business community. So we see, actually, even now we are facing unprecedented COVID-19 that we never faced in the history of mankind. This also has a huge impact on the migration. And just for example, a number of Chinese students, a number of Chinese diasporas traveling around the world has really been affected by this COVID-19, and not, some of them even cannot be returned. So that we can see how a different culture, how different studies overseas, and the knowledge and skill and understanding of migration is so important for people, for migrants, but also for people in general. Actually, according to the data of IOM, and in 2019, China has surpassed the Russian with 1.7 million people living outside China, overseas, basically. So you can see the China become one of the actually third largest country of emigration in the world. And so to better promote the service and the governance, China actually officially established the National Immigration Administration in 2018, and also China actually joined the IOM in 2016. So those are milestone events actually in China, and it's also for the last number of years that IOM annual report has been getting wider and wider attention. So I think that we have really a great experts gathered also today, and also that we think that for the this timing is really highly relevant. That we take a really look at this great report, and we can have a lot of a discussion on that. And also we are really fortunate to work with our great friend at IOM, and also IOM Beijing, IOM China has been playing a very active role in this respect, and also experts like Martin has been internationally active in also researching China talent mobility between China and Canada and Western countries. So as a think tank, actually, as we are one of the leading think tank in the ranked among the top 100 think tanks in the world, and migration is really one of our key area of study. And we have been continuously publishing for the last 7-8 years the annual Blue Book on China international migration, Blue Book report. And also we have written a book about state immigration administration, I think, which is also widely read by Chinese policymakers. So we are also very thankful that entrusted by IOM for the last number of years, we've been translating, editing, and publishing this work in China, so that more people can know the work of IOM, and so that they can really see what's going on in the world, so we can have the best academic research and also the latest research on the IOM scholars and experts networks work that in the Chinese language. So the work that CCG is doing is really very relevant, and also is really trying to promote this better understanding of orderly and inclusive migration development. I think there's so much international experience that we can learn from, and on settlement, on how to handle the migration issues, and how to really serve to the migrant, and how to really also have an orderly and manageable fashion of peaceful and very healthy development of migration within China as well. So again, we want to thank IOM of UN to give this trust to CCG. And also we want to thank our CCG team for the hard work of translation particularly during the academic year to do this report. And also we want to thank Martin from University of Carleton to support this webinar. And I want to really welcome all the panelists and also our live audience. I think as time goes on, we'll see the increase of our live audience as well. So I just want to share that. And once again, thank you all, and really looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wang. And I will hand over. It's my pleasure to welcome Giuseppe Rossetti, who is the Chief of Mission of IOM in Beijing, for his welcome remarks. Please, Giuseppe.
Thank you very much, Dr. Giger, and thank you, Dr. Wang, for your support in hosting today's virtual launch of the 2020 World Migration Report in China, followed by what will surely be very engaging and highly qualified panel discussion. Indeed, IOM has had the pleasure to partner with CCG now for a number of years in the release of the Chinese edition of IOM's flagship publication, World Migration Report, which constantly features amongst the top downloaded publications on IOM's website. The report provides a useful evidence base on migration topics and trends globally, and it is a key tool to help all of us, be it scholars, practitioners, or policymakers, navigate such complex issues, particularly at this time of uncertainty when COVID-19 outbreaks demands both a balanced reflection and informed action. And in this regard, I really want to encourage webinar participants to download the report and help further disseminate it through your networks. Now more than ever before, more information on migration has become available to us globally. However, the interconnectedness of the world we live in means that often statistical data are alone inadequate to fully capture the dynamic, complex, and fast-paced nature of migration processes. And it is widely recognized that migration is influenced by and contributes vice versa to influence development, let alone geopolitical considerations. However, the rapid expansion in transnational connectivity, which the report touched on, further accelerated by adaptation strategies to COVID-19, is now presenting new and highly diversified challenges and opportunities in migration processes. It is in this context that it becomes increasingly relevant to stay abreast of trends and evolving patterns in migration. And we in IOM very much hope that you do find this report a valuable reference tool in your everyday work. IOM's new strategic vision, which was first presented to its member states at the last IOM Council, provides for the organization to be a strong and balanced voice in this increasingly toxic and polarized migration discourse. And to do so, it does need to be a source of credible information on migration data and trends, which is exactly what this report attempts to do. The 2020 World Migration Report was first launched at the IOM Council meeting late last year, and that is prior to COVID-19 outbreak. Then early this year, COVID-19 came along and reminded us just how volatile the world is becoming and how likely the world is to experience an increasing number of migration shocks over the next decade, for which governments across the globe need to prepare. Over the past months, IOM Migration Policy Research Division, whose head, Dr. Marina Kolev, is with us today, has published about 50 analytical snapshots on COVID-19, framing this issue from different angles. And these snapshots are currently being translated into Chinese and will soon be made available to all those interested in further assessing the present and projected impact of COVID-19 on migration and mobility. Recently, the United Nations Secretary General's policy brief on COVID-19 and people on the move stressed how COVID-19 disproportionate impact on people on the move presents us with an opportunity to reimagine human mobility for the benefit of all in a renewed effort to leave no one behind in the spirit of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. In Secretary General's words, exclusion is costly in the long run, whereas inclusion pays off for everyone. No one is safe until everyone is safe. And these takeaways echoes the commitments that countries around the world made at the time of the adoption of the Global Compact on safe, regular, and orderly migration in 2018, and also reflect on the hard-taught lessons that no country can fight this virus alone, just like no countries can manage migration alone. The notion of renewed partnership naturally brings me then to our webinar, which is testimony of IOM's continued and fruitful partnership with think tanks and academia, represented today by CCG and Carleton University, respectively. Indeed, good migration governance, and we will hear more about it during the panel discussion, requires both wall of government and wall of society efforts, due to the invaluable role that think tank, academia, media also represent today, private sector, the UN, various other international organizations, and the broader civil society can play. The newly established United Nations Network on Migration, for which IOM serves as coordinator and secretariat, will be a key gateway to strengthening partnerships across the system in this respect. Before I hand back, I would like to conclude my short remarks by thanking once again our co-host, Dr. Wang, and the whole team at the CCG for being a long-term partner of IOM, and also Dr. Giger, a well-known expert and friend of IOM, and all our distinguished panelists who have agreed to be with us today to reflect together on the relevance of the World Migration Report's insights to policy research priorities of the academic community in China and globally. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Giuseppe Rossetti, the Chief of Mission of the IOM in Beijing. And it's now my pleasure to hand over to Dr. Mary McAuliffe of IOM. She is heading the Migration Policy Research Section at IOM headquarters, and she's joining us from Geneva. Please, Mary, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Martin, and please allow me the latitude to also express my thanks to CCG and Dr. Wang and his team, again, for translating IOM's World Migration Report and being an ongoing partner with IOM. I'd also really like to thank Giuseppe Rossetti, my Chief of Mission and our very valued colleague in Beijing, who has set the groundwork for us through this presentation, but also, as he mentioned, in regards to supporting the translation of the World Migration Report and other products that are coming out shortly on COVID-19 and the impacts on migration and mobility. So special thanks to Giuseppe and his team for all the work he's doing in Beijing. Now, very quickly, I'm conscious that Martin is a Swiss German, so he's very keenly astute in terms of time. I shall try and keep this brief, including because what we intended to do during this webinar is really provide just the initial taste in regards to the World Migration Report, and encourage you, as Giuseppe mentioned, to go into the report, to download it. It is a very long report. And there is a lot of very rich data and the latest research and analysis on migration. We'll talk about that in a moment, but there is a wealth of information on truly a world migration report. We often suffer in terms of seeing a lot of research and analysis in certain parts of the world, Europe, North America, and other parts. This is something that we really are very conscious of, so we very much try and make this a genuine world migration report. Very quick presentation outline for you. We really just touch on the key contributions and the highlights of the 2020 report. As both Dr. Migration, and part of that is related, of course, to the dynamics of migration and the movement of migrants themselves. So we are very conscious of the current geopolitical context, of course, and we provide key statistics and recent developments, but we're trying to put the recent developments in a broader historical context. In terms of IOM itself, you can see that the number of member states since 2000, when the first report was launched, has increased significantly, and the field presence, of course, for IOM has increased also tremendously. The global overview chapter is specifically designed to look at the really big picture on migration, to really look at the latest data and trends on international migrants, as well as international migration, all the flows and the movements of people. We have a look at specific migrant groups, such as migrant workers, such as refugees and asylum seekers, and internally displaced persons. And we also draw on the growing body of IOM programmatic and operational data. Now, this isn't necessarily global in nature, but it can provide some very, very important insights into what is actually occurring at the ground level in regards to issues concerning missing migrants or assisted voluntary return, displacement tracking, and so on and so forth. We spend a lot of time and effort interrogating and understanding and analysing the data to show patterns and trends and differences across regions. For these outputs, we work very closely with an academic who is a professor at the Shanghai University, Professor Gaia Bell, who's one of the leading migration data specialists in the world. And we've worked over a number of years now to develop visual depictions of migration that are able to capture both the nuance but also the trends, as well as comparative analysis across different regions. And here we have on the left a figure showing migrants to, within and from Europe, and you can see that it is very different to the figure on the right, which is looking at Latin America and the Caribbean. So very quickly, readers, researchers, students, officials can flick through the report and see how the trends and the changes in migration have occurred over the last 30 years, as the case is for this particular series. We also use data to show patterns, trends and differences in regards to regions where there are substantial changes occurring that can be highlighted visually with impact in regards to population and proportional population change, which of course, as a demographer, I know that migration is often the hardest variable to actually quantify and to do projections on and estimations on, but it is one of the most important. And as Dr. Wang mentioned earlier, in an increasing globalizing environment, we are seeing international migration expand. And this is where, for example, on the left-hand side, we have population decline occurring in Europe. The need for migrant workers can be significant in certain parts of Europe. And on the right, we have Latin America and the Caribbean, and showing very clearly the population growth that has occurred over time there. We also use data to show complexity. So, for example, Africa is the most pointed in regards to, and the most obvious in regards to, the differences in hosting as well as producing refugees and asylum seekers. And we can see that there are very many countries who might be hosting refugees, but are also origin countries of refugees. Sudan, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and to some extent South Sudan definitely fall within that category. So we use some of the data and the visuals to show some of the really complex issues related to migration. I'll just put this one up on the screen. I won't read it out, but again, it is available on our website. One of the things that we do, we're very keen to explore, is really looking at some of the assumptions and some of the narrative discussions which are not supported by data. So some of the more interesting facts that a lot of people are not necessarily aware of. For example, we just have a few there, that France, for example, is the 6th top receiving country of international remittances. Germany is the 9th. And of course, China is the 2nd. And this is 2018 data from the World Bank. Our lead thematic chapter in the World Migration Report 2020 is on migrants' contributions in an era of increasing disruption and disinformation. Little did we know when we were producing this chapter for the World Migration Report that it would become even more relevant in the context of COVID-19. And we have seen increasing xenophobic racism and misinformation and disinformation in regards to migrants and mobility in the context of COVID-19, which I'm sure we will get onto later in the discussion. One of the key things, of course, that we really focus on in this research chapter is the need for balanced public discussions and the scrutiny of fake media content. We put great emphasis on migrant-centric research and understanding the experiences of migrants. We're seeing that come up in COVID-19 as well, and it's a really important sort of reminder for us. We'll talk about remittances a little bit later. And then, of course, the structural issues. Those are the policy kind of issues in regards to supporting migrants' contributions in a range of different settings. Here are the other thematic chapters, which I mentioned earlier. Now, very quickly, in terms of partnerships, this is really important to us. This is something that we have grown very much over time. We know that our work is only strengthened through partnerships with academic and applied researchers. We have all of the chapters peer-reviewed by IOM experts internally, but also by academic reviewers. And it's been a very significant boost for us in terms of maintaining the quality and the rigour of the report. We also work with a lot of external co-authors and contributors, some of whom work in academia and some of whom work in applied research settings around the world. And of course, as mentioned many times already, in terms of the translations, CCG has been a long-term partner in terms of translating the World Migration Report, IOM's flagship, into Chinese. I should also mention too that we're starting for the first time to really move beyond the UN languages. And this falls in the context of development, most definitely. Portuguese, for example, chapter 1 is already available, but chapters 2 and 3 are currently underway. And we've just commenced translations into German and also into Swahili. It would be wonderful if we could also provide more languages, and it's certainly something that is on a future agenda for us. But at the moment, fundraising is taking up a lot of time for the next report, shall we say. Now, the last 2 slides very quickly. Really want to just touch on a few points. As Giuseppe mentioned earlier, we have been doing a lot of work on COVID-19 and the transformations of migration and mobility globally. And we do have very much a global kind of focus. We are seeing that this is a seismic geopolitical event that will transform migration and mobility systems. I think everybody understands that, but we're not entirely sure yet. We're still, reasonably early in the pandemic to understand exactly what that is going to look like post-COVID-19. It has become the great disruptor. And what I'm talking about here is the immobility, the travel restrictions globally that have been unprecedented are disrupting migration patterns and processes and systems around the world. The initial research and analysis, but this is only being strengthened, I think, over time, is showing that the most vulnerables in societies are the most affected by COVID-19. Of course, this relates to socioeconomic issues, but we do find, for example, migrants, including refugees, often in those very vulnerable settings, and they are the ones who are very much feeling the brunt of the pandemic globally. We also know that the post-pandemic recovery will be strongly linked to migration and mobility systems. And part of that is that international remittances will be key. We're already seeing some countries experience increases in remittances during COVID-19. And this is despite the projected declines for 2020 globally. on the one hand, it's likely, highly likely, that we will see declines over the longer term, medium and longer term. But at the moment, it's also intuitive that if your family is facing COVID-19 issues and very significant issues in terms of, food and shelter and poverty alleviation type mechanisms, that people will want to send more money home if they can. And that is the key thing. One of the aspects that we've been talking about recently with partners is the need to reduce the costs of remittances, for example, to open up remittance channels and so forth. We know from some of the data that is starting to come through that migrants are on the front line in destination countries, in origin countries, performing essential work, but they are also at the forefront of responding to socio-economic impact. And that is through remittances, to be able to provide a buffer for their families back home. As you can imagine, the next World Migration Report that will be released at the end of next year, there will be a thematic chapter. It will be the lead chapter for part 2, and that will be on COVID-19, migration and mobility. There is a lot more to come, of course, in this space, but we're starting to work on that now. Lastly, I'll just leave this slide up. We have been, like most people, very interested in bringing together partners to really look at the impact on COVID-19. We've started to do some high-level kind of think pieces through our migration research high-level advisors network. And we've also recently released 2 publications on gender and COVID-19, supported by the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs Gender Equality Unit. And we've just started to release some migration research series papers on COVID-19. As Giuseppe mentioned, we have now more than 50 analytical snapshots on migration and mobility impacts. The last 2 were posted over the weekend, including updates to mobility regimes and also international students, which is a key issue, of course. I will leave it there. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you so much, Dr. McAuliffe. And now the content of the World Migration Report was introduced, and I think it's a very important report. And also the analytical snapshots that are released right frequently have been released over the last few months are very important. I say that also as a teacher, preparing now my online courses on migration, and useful actually the World Migration Report is always for guiding my students as well and giving them actually exactly the data and the slides they sometimes need and so on to present. So thank you so much for introducing to us this important report. And as was mentioned, most chapters probably were written of the World Migration Report before this pandemic broke out. And so today what we're gonna do is actually in our panel discussion with our experts, and Mary, please join us then as well, is to look first actually at the general picture, perhaps pre-COVID-19, before COVID-19, and then actually in a second round of discussion, focus on COVID-19 and what might be the impacts and what might be expected. To say one thing, migration is here to stay, and it remains important, though we are currently perhaps at a very unique moment in world time to almost have a standstill in mobility, right? But certain forms of migration are also continuing to flow. I say that now from a Canadian perspective, and as rightly pointed out, and I think it's really be stressed, the point is many migrant workers are frontline workers, are performing essential tasks. And I think also the gender dimension is very important to look at that, and the remittance dimension that was mentioned by Dr. McAuliffe. So it's my pleasure now to start our panel discussion. And with me today are Professor Liu. She's an associate professor at the Institute of Development Studies, Southwestern University of Finance and Economics, and Professor Wei Shen, who is the associate pro-vice chancellor for international relations at Deakin University, Australia. Furthermore, I have also the pleasure to introduce Ms. Dr. Yadi Zhang, who holds since recently a PhD and is both a lecturer at the School of Journalism, Chongqing University, and also an assistant researcher at the Center for Non-Traditional Security and Peaceful Development Studies in Zhejiang University. And last but not least, we have Professor Zhang, who is the Dean at the School of International Studies, Academy of Overseas Chinese, and also the Director of the Center for Transnational Migration Studies, a very important migration center at Jinan University, Guangzhou. We will directly start off and aim then to address some questions that were circulated beforehand, are printed actually on the program. I start first with the same question addressed to one of our scholars based in China, and then the same question to someone who is based outside China, but is very well aware of all the trends, who is based in Australia, but previously for a longer while has been based in Europe. So my first question is directed actually to Professor Liu in Chengdu and Professor Shen based currently in Australia. So Professor Liu, being one of the experts in China on migration and listening to today's presentation of the World Migration Report, what are, in your view, relevant insights, takeaways from the report? And in what sense is it good to have actually the report in a Chinese language and have this available? What does it mean for scholar discussions and wider public discussions in China, in your view? Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Martin. It's actually a great pleasure to be part of this event because World Migration Report has been one of my must-read sources when I'm conducting my own research on migration. So based on this latest report and also my own research on and experiences with Chinese migrants and returnees, I would like to share some thoughts, which I hope may contribute a little bit to our conversations today. I think a couple of keywords in this report echo my thoughts quite a bit are the words of uncertainty and change. So I find one change among all the trends of global migration is particularly interesting. That is between 2013 and 2017, high-income countries experienced a slight drop in migrant workers. But the middle-income countries observed the biggest increase of migrant workers. So it's an increase of 13 million. So this significant increase of migrant workers in these countries shows that some developing countries have become attractive destinations for migrants, globally or regionally. So I have read a lot research on, let's say, brain circulation and the reverse migration between particular countries. But I think this report actually provides a really clear evidence that circulation of migrants workers and return migrations are not just trickles here and there, but actually become main flows. So let's take China as an example. China is classified as an upper middle income country in this report, also by the World Bank. So from 2010 to 2018, the annual population of returnees back to China increased nearly 4 times. And also the population of foreign students and foreign workers in China has doubled. So in China, all these people are generally considered as international talent. So since 2000, China has been implementing numbers of policies and programs at levels of both central and local governments to target and attract international talents to China. So after 2 decades, we can see the increasing population of returnees, international students, and skilled migrants in China. So, but some scholars also question the effect of those policies in terms of whether or not they can attract the very best, the very top of the global talents. So, and also some argue and talk about asking the question like how long these talents will stay in China, especially international students and the foreign workers. So with all the increasing number of immigrant populations, in China, I believe issues like social inclusions of international migrants, diversity and social cohesion, and the relationship between migrants and the communities would become emerging and pressing areas of research in China, not only for the academic community, but also for the government. We know for the first time, China established the National Immigration Administration in 2018 to provide better governance and services to foreigners in China. And the requirements for permanent residency in China have been gradually relaxed. And also the permanent resident card has been integrated into the system to be an official Chinese ID of foreigners in China. And also lately, I've been working with some local government officials to do policy research on international talents. I noticed that there have been more talks about how to support and retain the international talents in China than simply how to attract them. So it's not that they care less about attracting skilled migrants. It's more that they also recognize the importance of migrants' inclusion in China's society. So in general, we can see an open and inclusive and supportive social environment for international migrants would be a great and positive impact on talent attraction.
Thank you so much,
hello?
Professor Lu.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much for your remarks. And I want to hand over to Professor Shen now. And we should mention also, and that's very important, the Chinese community abroad is also a very significant scholarly community. And we have many Chinese scholars actually working in many countries on migration, and Professor Shen is one of them. So I would like to ask you the same question, the World Migration Report and the Chinese edition, and what is the relevance for you of research and you as a scholar? And perhaps if you can speak also to the policy community, the business community, perhaps. Yeah,
thank you very much, Martin. This is really a privilege to be part of this discussion, and it's also very special because having been a researcher at IOM in 2003, nearly 17 years ago, and that's also how I knew about Henry's work on international migration. It's great to be part of this panel, and also I want to continue what Professor Lu has said, and my research is also focused on international student migrations and also the brain circulation. And I just want to say that in the last decade, international student flows have grown very significantly. The UNESCO report in 2019 suggested that in 2000 there were 2 million students, international students, but it became 5.3 million international students in 2017. And I think this kind of growing trend is also confirmed by the latest World Migration Report. One of the chapters deals with East Asia, actually highlighted the importance of East Asia being both outward and inward student mobility. And particularly students from China have grown very high, in Australia and New Zealand, in the parts I'm in, Chinese students are certainly the #1 population group among the universities here. And also what I want to say that the report is important for China is, as Professor Lu has said, China is not only a sending country for international students, it's also becoming a very important receiving country for international students and skill migration in general. And what we can see that there's a growing regionalization already prior to COVID-19, where the students are more likely to study within their regions. For instance, China is now the biggest, a very important destination for Korean students, and nearly, in China, Korean students are the most, it's the largest group of international students in China, which has grown, very significantly in the last few years. And this is also due to a number of policies, initiatives from China, for instance, in the higher education sector, the double first class initiatives, and a more global level, the Belt and Road initiative, where there's a kind of a drive to attract international students and talents to study and live in China. And recently, I also finished a multi-year project with Frank Peak from Leiden University called Immigrant China. And the project is a Sino-European collaboration with a number of European partners. And our starting point for this project is to look at China as not just a purely ascending country, but increasingly become a destination country. And the student and the type of migrations to China vary from region to region. So from certain parts of China, we see a lot of marriage migration, for instance, the border with Russia or the border with Southeast Asia. In Shanghai, in Beijing, big cities, we see a flow of international students. We look at, also business and also traders in EU and in Guangzhou, mainly from Africa and Arab countries. And my particularly research team really look at highly skilled migration, especially European students and European scientists in Chinese universities. And one of the findings really echo what the previous speaker has said. Is, it's not only get them to China, but also to integrate them. I think this is a very critical point, how the integration of, internationals residents in China. And also the integration, varies from different types of migration. Integration of student may be different from integration of a business person or trader. And so this is becoming a very important issue. So I really think, the report of the World Migration is really important. It has a huge implication for the policy communities, but also for universities and the business communities and the non-governmental organizations. And I just, I'm sure we will discuss that later, but the impact of COVID-19 really have fundamental implications and impacts for student migration, which I look forward to the discussion later on. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you so much, Professor Shen. And it has been mentioned now as well, and international students, Chinese group is a very important one. I say that as again, from a Canadian perspective, most of our students are from China. And also we see an increasing number of international students going to China. And I had the pleasure to visit various universities, including also Jinan University and Professor Zhang's University, where you have actually the same diversity in the classroom that you have actually in a Canadian university. And that means really a lot. And I think the points highlighted that it's also about the retention and actually to make sure the integration works and there is a balance and an orderly approach to migration and integration is very important, was highlighted now at various times already. So we stay actually still in the context of before COVID-19. And I would like to ask now, almost similar questions to Dr. from Chongqing University. So bringing you in as one of the newer researchers on migration in China, I would like to ask you first, what's the importance also of this report for actually a still very emerging field of migration studies in China? And secondly, what has been actually the role of migration for Chinese societies? And you can also focus definitely on the Chinese community abroad because you have been studying protection of overseas worker. Yeah, please go ahead, Yadi.
Okay. Thanks, Martin, and thanks, Martin, for having me in this webinar. And it is my great pleasure to be here and to share my opinions and ideas with you. And actually, the first question is, I think during the last 5 decades, and China has become a very top and important migration sending country and also the migration receiving country, as a lot of professors and experts said before. And so I'm quite interested in the topic that how migration studies evolve in China or in China's academia. And so analyzes that a lot of, so I read a lot of the articles and reports about the China's migration studies. And so I think the World Migration Report is quite important for the China's academia, especially in analyzing the migration studies. So because we can use a lot of the data and the facts and from this report. And we also can, this report can open up very useful and quite a good platform for the China's experts to exchange their ideas, and it kinds of the how to say, the builds a bridge for the Chinese experts to the IOM experts or the international experts. So I think this report is really very important for us. So yeah, that is my opinion. Yeah, thanks.
Thank
Martin.
you so much. Thank you very much for your contribution, Yeri. And I should mention that we recently actually published together a paper where we looked at the existing migration studies in China and how it has developed. And we identify actually CCG as a key focal point in China on migration studies, and actually providing multiple platforms for discussion, and also as a very important organizer of a lot of events. And we have been meeting, or all here have been meeting regularly at CCG's annual conferences on global migration and talent mobility. And CCG is also, we mentioned several times, the topic of international student mobility is actually also really important in releasing regular reports on this topic as well. Yeah. So last but not least, I would like to bring in Professor Zhang from Jinan University. And I already mentioned I had the pleasure to visit him and his university and his students, and was quite impressed by actually how many international students there are, and how important that field, also the discussions of migration are for them. And I would like to bring you in and actually already with your help start a bit our second round of discussion, because Professor Zhang is a leading expert on the Chinese overseas community, and as well, or of course, also very strongly interested in governance issues and governance of migration. And so we had really wonderful conversations already together. So I first would like to ask you also, as a leading expert on Chinese overseas, this group is so numerous, it is so important. The World Migration Report really highlighted how can this group actually contribute to the development of global migration governance, and what do you see is the role of this very important group community? And my second question would be to you to start directly the next round of discussion. To what extent is actually COVID-19 really a game changer for the Chinese overseas community and the way we think about migration and also migration governance? Thank you. Please go ahead.
Okay. Good day, everyone. So good. Actually, good afternoon here, but morning and so yeah, to be very honored to participate this in a workshop. And as Martin's question, I think the first of all, China in Chinese academic community, there are many scholars that are doing this migration studies, but generally not very much, not very many they are doing transnational, and migration. But in terms of the overseas Chinese studies, and generally we use the Chinese diaspora, but in China, actually we have a very independent group of scholars. We have our own just research group. And we also have a even international called the International Society for the Studies of Chinese Overseas. But Chinese overseas studies are a very important and independent group of scholars. Of course, they are multidisciplinary, but basically there are many, they are doing history, sociology. And so I think this report is going to be a very important shedding the new lights actually to help this group of scholars. If you take the example of my institution, we are one of the, and you can see we're a School of International Studies, but also Academy of Overseas Chinese Studies. And this institution was chosen by the Ministry of Education to name as one of the key research center. So we are mobilizing a lot of scholars doing this overseas Chinese studies. But generally, I'm also a newcomer because I'm doing, international relations and also the people, people's mobility and international relations. But when I'm coming to this group of scholars of the overseas Chinese studies group, I found actually they are quite independent, and they are all doing, either the history, the economy, the politics of Chinese overseas. They are not very international. And later on, actually, I think under a lot of new endeavor, like the CCG, like by our own, the scholars of this group, they are moving to a much more, international perspective. On one hand, we are trying to put the Chinese overseas, as one of the, one group of the migration studies, and of course, is the Chinese, Chinese immigration. And of course, we have another part, like the previous scholars, they all mentioned that Chinese immigration. But anyway, I think this new report, and this report, and actually gave some very new perspective to help the group of scholars of the overseas Chinese studies, to study the Chinese is not Chinese scholar, migration is not very, we are particular, but we are also general, in terms of the international, migration. So, that's why actually, if you take our institution as example, and more and more students, they are doing the overseas Chinese studies, but now they are much taking the international perspective, from the international organizations like IOM, and they are doing comparison with the Chinese diaspora and other, like India diaspora in Southeast Asia. So this is I think it's one of the very, very important thing. That's why, I think we should thanks the CCG very much, and they are doing a very good job. But on the other hand, I think this is also reflect emerging interest, of the Chinese community, of the Chinese scholars community. We are doing more and more international and studies. And in terms of, more like what we have discussed, and a lot of, China, of course, in the report, China, it was not on that list, not yet we are receiving, but actually more and more China are becoming receiving country of migrations, students, but also the like small traders, the cities I'm living in, like in Guangzhou, there's a large, actually more and more foreigners, small traders, actually, for example, from African, they are coming to Guangzhou, and that's why there's a very, influential group called CEEC, Chinese in Africa, Africans in China. More and more scholars, they are doing this and kind of research. So, and generally, I think this report actually help the overseas Chinese studies community, how to change our research and perspective. So I think this is quite important.
Thank you, Professor Zhang. I also should mention here at this point, because we have been talking about China becoming also a destination, and Professor Liu mentioned actually also the talent attraction, and that was mentioned also of the retention of international students. And there's quite a focus on actually China attracting new flows. And on this aspect, because we talk also about governance and how actually the future of politics could look like, or regulation of migration. And I think we should mention in this context also like new global frameworks like the UN Compact on Migration and other frameworks that are developing. It is very interesting to mention that CCG has been also leading at the international from a new initiative, and it was actually introduced to the Paris Peace Forum. It is about a global talent organization, an alliance of organizations, HETO, And I would like briefly to ask Dr. Wang to tell us a bit about this initiative, because I think it's very important also as we move into post-pandemic situation and we have to relaunch economies. And as Dr. McAuliffe already highlighted, migration will play a key role in actually this process. So I would like to ask you, Henry, to briefly introduce to us the initiative a little bit. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Martin, and thank you, Mary, and also Cresciti, and also our distinguished panelists for the previous talk. My staff was telling me now we have 200,000 viewers online and watching us live, actually. So that shows you know, this kind of late afternoon rush hour time, we have so many people still online to watch us. So it's quite attractive. What I think briefly want to mention is that you know, China being the largest talent mobility country, probably, for example, we have 700,000 students goes aboard every year. We have you know, over 500,000 comes back. So China is probably the largest brain circulation country in the world, because every year you have more than 500,000 going out, more than 500,000 coming back. And then you have actually over 1 million expatriates, foreign nationalities working in China. And that number, as the issue was mentioned, has been doubling for the last few years. And China has set up the new administration of national administration of migration. So I think that for NGO, you know, I'm on the steering committee of Paris Peace Forum, because Paris Peace Forum is really looking for NGO proposals on how to contribute to the global governance and globalization management. So I think that being China as one of the largest focus center on talent mobility, it may be good for China to learn from the rest of the world. So maybe we can, you know, bring the expertise of IOM, IO, and you know, OECD and many others. We actually so Alliance of a Global Talent Organization has been proposed in the last few years and being promoted by Paris Peace Forum and OECD. We've been there to talk to them, and also we have invited the you know, Mr. Cresciti to you know, also join us for Hong Kong conference last year on the feasibility study of that. So I think this is very interesting to practice, to really compare the best practice. What are the suitable policies? What are the you know, the exchanges that we can learn from each other, and particularly during this kind of on the highly skilled part. So I think this is really relevant, very relevant. We hope that we can work with IOM closely, and we can really to bring this large talent mobility part of China into this kind of international exchanges, so that we can learn from each other, we can exchange from each other, and we can really, because this is the trend, and for the future with all the AI, with automation, you know, high tech, and all those international e-commerce. So I think this talent part will play more and more important role, and we have to learn from each other. So I think that can be a new area we can contribute to this great world migration development. So I really appreciate all the great talks we have today, and I want to thank IOM for presenting this great report.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wang. And I think in this context, we should also mention Peace Forum last year. We were there with actually Frank Lasko was on board, who is also leading IOM expert. So we have been discussing this with leading international organizations. And I think this alliance or this project is very important, because the Chinese community abroad is massively important in actually around the world in promoting innovation. And actually a lot of the students are in the so-called STEM field. And it has been very important also for China's development, right? The return migration as well. The return, and Dr. Wang is actually the leading expert on the return flows as well, and how it has promoted business development and entrepreneurship, right? So I think this is a very important group to look at and to include in any discussion of future global governance on migration, and actually how to restart, actually not only particular countries, but around the world, relaunch economies post-COVID-19. So we already mentioned it, COVID-19 several times. It's a massive game changer, or as Dr. McAuliffe calls it, a migration disruptor, but it's also a game changer, definitely, of how we think actually. And if we think about it more broadly, migration simply as one type of a very specific type of mobility, and not everyone wants to stay forever abroad. Actually, the Chinese example shows that most students return again, and it's actually more about circulation. And I think this is important because how we look at it, if we start from regular travels, business travels that might become like more continuous forms of engagement with particular countries, business context, and so on, perhaps then leading at some point to settlement, if not perhaps continue mobility. I think it's very important to look at this process. And I really think we should also mention in this perspective the Belt and Road Initiative and other projects, the European Union neighborhood policy and the mobility partnerships the European Union is promoting, and so on. So I think I start now definitely our second round of discussion, and let's talk now about COVID-19 and how we think it is already impacting perhaps on flows. And I want to start with you, Wei, and based now in Australia, but having lived also a long time and studied in migration in the European case, and now being in Australia for a while already, and being connected to Chinese overseas community of scholars, what do you currently see? What is going on? To what extent is COVID-19 impacting and a game changer in our thinking on migration? Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Martin. I just want to say, I totally agree with you. Migration is not anymore one-way traffic. It's becoming more popular. And as we call, the overseas Chinese, you have the seaweeds, sea turtles, and the sea goose. So seaweeds, and sea turtles, sea turtles are returning to China, and the sea goose are kind of flying between China and overseas countries. So I consider myself as a sea goose. And certainly talking about COVID-19, that has a very significant impact in the area I'm researching on, which is international student migration, and it's also partly my work at the university. And already, in the Australian case, as I said earlier, Chinese students and international students play a very important part of the Australian society and the universities. And the growth of international students are the most important contribution to the net overseas migration for Australia. And the current border, closure and travel ban has blocked nearly 20% of the, our international students from entering Australia. And as you probably can hear, in Victoria, we are currently under stage 4 lockdown, so the situation is quite challenging. And this has very important impact for our universities and also for our students, as well as for other sectors. And this is also a period which calls for a lot of migration policy flexibility and innovation. And one areas we have seen is also is on the post-study work rights. Research done by our universities and other universities have shown that that the right to work after study is a very important consideration for international students when they decide to study abroad. And our researcher, Professor Lei Chuan at Deakin University, interviewed between 2007 and 2018 nearly 1,200 visa holders in Australia on their motivation for study. 82% of the Indian students interviewed who said, post-study work is the driving factor behind their decision to study in Australia. And obviously, now many students cannot travel to Australia or to many other destination countries like Canada and the UK. So what kind of changes, migration visa scheme should be? And we have seen the UK has already introduced flexibility for eligibility for post-study work rights, even if the students have studied online in the current academic year. And the same with Canada. So Canada also announced a very flexible approach to post-graduation work permits for international studying online. So as you know, at your university, I'm sure Martin Carlton, many of your international students cannot travel. So we're offering the opportunity to study online and also the possibility to study in onshore once the border is open. compared to Canada and UK, Australia border is still closed, so that's more challenging. But we have introduced a new a visa scheme which last month, which again, counting the time when international studies offshore towards the eligibility for the work experience in Australia. And also there are some innovative pilot projects in certain states in Australia, for instance, Australian Capital Territory and the South Australia and Northern Territory, for a safe corridor for international students to come onshore. I think, another impact for this COVID-19 is what I'm concerned is in the future for the potential brain drain for specialized sectors, professions, particularly in the health and medical areas. Brain drain is already a very, long-standing discussion and research topic for international migration. And particularly we see as part of the COVID-19, some countries have already called for specialized medical professions seeking jobs abroad. For instance, the US announced in late March a call for medical professions to apply for US visa. And nearly 9,000 Egyptian doctors were accepted in this scheme to come to the US, according to Arab News Network. Similarly, in many Western European countries like Germany and France and also Canada, they have also specifically targeted medical professions. And I see that a major challenge, particularly for a continent which is Africa, which has nearly 24% of the global burden for disease, but only 3% of the global health workers and 1% of the financial resources in the world, according to the Global Health Observatory. So I think this is really an important issue that we need to ensure there's not a brain drain for especially the least developing countries in terms of medical professions. The African Union has a migration policy framework 2018 to 2027, which tackles some of the issues in the medical professions, but we need innovative brain circulation mechanism, for instance, leveraging, like you said, Martin, the diaspora network, education cooperation. So that's where universities like ours can contribute to, and some even call a global housekeeping force to make it more effective and long-term strategy to ensure that medical professions and medical services are available no matter where they are. So I will stop here, Martin.
Great, thank you so much. And I think this links really back to what Dr. Wang and this interesting project of global talent organization or some kind of more targeted discussions, because rightly said, you mentioned actually the issue of perhaps brain drain or care drain that is might be a negative effect if it's not managed well, and the health professionals. So they are one sector. But of course, we have also to think about the talent attraction or retention becomes now even perhaps more fierce. And actually this war over talent that we were discussing, many scholars over the last 2 years, it might be really working differently and perhaps might become even more fierce. So I think an initiative to bring together sector partners from civil society, business community, policy community, international organization, the scholarly community, I think is very important here to use that moment. And COVID-19, I think, is really a watershed moment. And right now, CCG and my research team, we are leading together a project that actually looks at industry technology clusters around the world and how they are doing with COVID-19, and actually how the business partners try to keep connected to talent, because right now the issue we are seeing, they are disconnected. And where it was really great that you told us about the flexibility some countries are offering with online studies. In Canadian case, you can actually count 2 years to residence requirement later on if you start now getting enrolled and study online. And there are employers that already start developing online tools to already do onboarding of future talent, of actually connecting already to international students, right? And this is a vivid example. The talent competition is ongoing, it is continuing, right? And I think it's very important for many countries in the world how they situate themselves, and actually as an international community, and thinking about the UN Global Compact on migration, guidelines or orientations it gave, I think it's very important to not miss that moment right now to actually make sure that migration governance stays balanced, and it's actually not a changer that even is going to the worst, right? An unbalanced, disorderly outer migration system. What was very often mentioned on the side, and it's very closely connected to brain circulation, is the issue of remittances. And I want to bring back Dr. McAuliffe here to share a bit some of her insights and how COVID-19 might be impacting remittances, but also what role remittances play during the pandemic and post-pandemic. Thank you much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martin. I'm just bringing up, and this is the wonderful things about doing webinars, which is, very much changed all of our lives. Those especially who work in research, being able to connect globally. But this is a presentation that we're invited to do by the World Economic Forum, their strategic intelligence platform in June, and on COVID-19. And one of the kind of key issues is the remittances, international remittances that we've been talking about, in terms of the projected decline, but also that they can be a real buffer for frontline response, socioeconomic recovery going forward in regards to COVID-19. And one of the key things, which is depicted in this really very good World Bank graph on the top left-hand corner, is why remittances are so important globally. We can see that over time there has been a very significant shift and growth in international remittances, which is the red line there, far outstripping now official development assistance, the dotted black line beneath it. And also we're seeing changes in foreign direct investment occurring too. We spoke recently at a webinar in regards to Africa and COVID-19 issues. And we can see in Africa, for example, foreign direct investment has dropped very significantly since 2013 onwards, and remittances are now far outstripping foreign direct investment this is the entire continent. So, and that's a very significant shift. We know then that even with the projected fall for 2020, which is globally predicted by the World Bank to be 20%, we are seeing some kind of anomalies in some respects. On the one hand, sort of economically, but also in terms of frontline response. We're seeing Mexico, for example, experience a real spike in international remittance inflows, with family members sending back money from overseas. They might have a small amount of savings, and of course they are wanting to make sure that they are providing support to this pandemic shock. It's also occurring in other countries, the Philippines, for example, Guatemala, and there is research showing in regards to previous pandemics, which were more localized, that the same phenomena kind of exists. The challenge now is the medium and long term. How do we support remittance flows as part of key response and recovery to COVID-19? Because the projections, I think, I'm not saying they're inaccurate. I think over time, they're likely to be proved accurate. But our challenge as an international community, civil society partners, the private sector, and so forth, is to make sure that we can really open up and utilize international remittances as a frontline response. In regards to talent mobility, I just want to very briefly, if you will indulge me for one moment, share something that might be of interest in regards to talent mobility and relates to a project that we have been working on for some time with the World Economic Forum. And that is in relation to the migration transformation map. That some people might be aware of. It has been translated into Chinese, and I had the great pleasure of presenting the migration transformation map at an event in Tianjin after it was translated into Chinese recently with the World Economic Forum. And one of the key things that the forum has been very keen to stress is that, yes, we need to be looking at inequality and uneven development, securitization, conflict and security challenges and displacement, as well as the demographic issues. But talent patterns is really central to global prosperity and to making sure that we are utilising and providing opportunities for up-and-coming students, as Professor Shen mentioned, and also as Dr. Wang certainly mentioned in regards to the Paris Peace Forum. So here, if you can see this, hopefully you can, there are a number of languages that are available, and we're really pleased to be working with the World Economic Forum to make sure that we have this, what I would call a balanced accounts of migration. It does need to include talent patterns and talent mobility, international students, but of course high-skilled workers who are really central to contributing to societies all around the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think it's really important also what was mentioned on the SAFU slide, one key aspect, and we had printed that also on the program as one discussion points. And I want to use actually that one to bring back our panelists. So I think it's really important how we communicate also as scholars and experts on migration. And there has been a lot of tension recently surrounding and uncertainties and fake facts and so on, and not to say, and actually the World Migration Report devotes quite some attention to actually get the facts right. And I think the importance of language is really important, and teaching about migration issues. So I would like to bring back Professor Lu and Professor Zhang to tell us a bit, like in their work and in their daily work, also encounter with students in China. How do you actually talk about migration? Why is it so important, and how actually can you train students on these issues? Yeah, thank you. Perhaps Professor Lu, if you don't mind, get started. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So talking about students, how we train about students, it's like there are lots of things about the international migration, especially I actually taught some classes. I don't have a full course on international migration, which I actually hope for. But at the same time, I find it's interesting to explain to Chinese students about what international migration is. It's really, it's quite really a brand new area for them. Because in China, when we talk about migration, lots of times we talk about internal migration. We talk about the migrant workers. When we talk about migrant workers, they're not international migrant workers. They're more peasant workers moving from rural areas to urban, to cities. So when you start talking about the, you can share with them the similarities, like especially before the hukou system was kind of really open up and relaxed a couple of years ago. The hukou system is kind of share some similarities with the immigration policies and visa policy. In a way, because when we talk about migrants, it's very important to talk about the migration status. So what kind of status you have in this country, in this host country? It's kind of remind them about what kind of status those migrant workers from rural area getting into the city, because those status determines who can stay, who has to leave, and also what kind of public supports or welfare services and that we can receive in this this society, in this host communities. So I think that's very interesting to share that, to have that similarities, especially before hukou system was relaxed.
Thank you very much. And I think also a lot of Chinese families who know very well about experience of actually being abroad, coming back, having family members, migrating to other cities, coming back to other countries, studies, coming back, and so on. And I think it's very important that this is actually a very important facet of globalization and also China's opening up process. And I want to bring in Professor Zhang now from Jinan University to also share his thoughts about that.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, actually, we are offering some courses to the students, but basically, as I said, we have more courses about the, Chinese overseas studies. But now we are introducing some courses like generally and just international and migration. Yeah, I think this is kind of it's a new phenomena, like the China to being traditionally, is a country actually in the past several hundred years, and especially in the past 200 years, and China was a big country of the sending migration, and the sending country, like this report to show that China is still the number 3, right? But yeah, that's why the tradition, like I said, the community. We have an independent community of the overseas Chinese studies, but the new phenomenon is like in the past 40 years, with the China's just opening up and more international interaction with the China and and the whole the international community, and more Chinese, they are still going out. But more and more, the foreigners, students and traders, skilled workers, they're coming to China. Like just Dr. Wang just said, in China, in terms of government, right? The Chinese government like to pay more and more attention to this kind of new phenomenon. China joined, IOM in 2016, and 2 years later, actually, and the Chinese government, we have a new agency called the National Immigration and Administration, so and the Public Security and Ministry. So and in terms of the students, actually, right, and we are training the students, in the discipline of international politics, but we are introducing more and more, let the students study the politics much more from the bottom line, from the people's flow. So this is becoming more and more important, and happy to see more and more young people, they are getting more and more interest, to study this topic. Marty, thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think also, again, from a Canadian perspective, I think it's very important to think about also as a country receiving increasing international students. It is very much about the regulation and keeping actually this as an orderly system, and actually having pathways, but also avoiding issues or that come out of improperly management and regulation. So in Canada, we have emerging discussions like whether domestic students are like at less privileged now than international students. And I think you want to avoid these issues, right? So it's very important about communication and also having a proper regulation in place that accompanies these processes, right? That this stays also controlled and regulated. And I think China has done, an impressive policy development in this aspect, also allowing actually for students to work in China, to gain work experience, and actually thinking more and more actively retention, but then also about the proper integration, I think, in society, which is important to do. And I think China can actually indeed share a lot, and not only learn from other countries, but can share a lot of expertise already in this area. I would like to bring in Dr. Zhang now, because you have been abroad in Georgetown University. You worked with Susan Martin, and you have been returned. You took on a lectureship now at the university. Please share us briefly, in a way, for why it's for you important actually to teach also research migration in China. Yeah, please.
Okay, thanks, Martin. And yes, I think it's really important in teaching and studying migrations in China, because like Professor Zhang said, and previously we are in China's migration studies, and we also use the overseas Chinese rather than the international migration. But with the globalization and China's experts and China's professors, need to be more and more international, and we need to open more dialogues with the international experts. So we need to put the terms of the overseas Chinese into the field of the international migration. And we also need to institutionalize the China's migration studies. For example, how to say, build more and more institutions and build more and more social organizations or the non-government organizations like CCG, and to push the international migration studies in China. And that is the first aspect. And the second aspect to study the migration studies, that is international migration become more and more important in the world politics. And it is a very complicated and diverse issue. It is not only about the student migration or the global talent, it's also about the labor migration. And during the COVID-19, because my PhD thesis is about the protection of labor migration, so I pay more attention to it. And I found that during the COVID-19, and a lot of labor migrations get unemployed, and they cannot afford themselves. And in Singapore and in Israel, hundreds of Chinese migrant workers get infected, but their voice ignored to some extent. And actually, this pandemic makes them more vulnerable than ever before. And not only about them, and also about the IDPs and the refugees. And they get more and more vulnerable during this pandemic year. So as a scholar and as an expert, or the workers and experts, and we need to pay more attention to this vulnerable group. And that is the second aspect. So I think it's really important for studying international migration in China. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So bringing it actually to the topic of governance, and I think well organized forms of governance. Recent time, we saw a lot of questions also coming into our webinar actually about student mobility to US and the current state of affairs in global relations and so on. And I think Professor Zhang and Professor Shen, perhaps you can share some insights here. Let's perhaps start with Professor Zhang. You asked me to speak also about this topic and COVID-19 and what's going on right now also in global relations and how important that is in global discussions. Please.
Yeah, okay, Mark. Yeah, all right. As I mentioned, on one hand, I'm trying to internationalizing the community of overseas Chinese studies community. Like a lot of Chinese scholars, they're doing the Chinese overseas studies much more from comparative international perspective. And on the other hand, generally I found, and if you take Chinese, China, how to manage or how to governance the Chinese diaspora, I found actually we have a much long history, more than 100 years ago. And, in China, actually, we have a central government departmental level, department, the agency, they trying to manage how to serve the overseas Chinese, right? And of course, at that time, international, the whole situation is very different, especially a lot of Chinese diaspora in Southeast Asia. They do not have the citizenship problem. They do not have a very clear idea of nationality. But now it's different. But anyway, from that 100 years ago, and Chinese government they have a very special way and policy to do this diaspora management. And if you put it but that's a very long story. But put it very simply, you can see that we have you can see that their rationale, also is changing. And if you take an example, previously I found, the government policy, they very emphasize on how to encourage the Chinese diaspora to contribute, China's state building, nation building. right? But now we found their open slogan policy is that how do we serve this Chinese diaspora? We encourage you not necessarily to contribute everything, remittance back to China. We encourage them, as long as you can live well, right? If you come to the other countries, as long as you can live peacefully, you can live well, that is our policy. That's our intention. We will help you, doing a lot of everything, trying to let the people to live peacefully and happily everywhere. So this is a very important, rational change. So, and yeah, that's why it says, I cannot see that China's case, is very special or unique. I think every country have its own diaspora experience and policy, but at least, from China's case, this, past 100 years, I like to see that, this will provide some, some suggestions, maybe some highlights to the global, as we can see, the global, migration governance. And China's case, I think, we can learn, from each other. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you so much. On this point, I would like to bring back very briefly also Dr. Wang. And we have been talking a bit about the HCTO idea, but also as a leading think tank in China, I think you can really talk about governance and global governance and China's role as well in this process. Please, Henry.
Thank you, Martin, and thanks for all the great views and Mary and others I just shared. I hope that Mr. Rossetti will give a final concluding remarks. But what I think is a fascinating topic, because migration actually for the last 4 decades since China opened up, migration has played such an important role for China to transform. So we have, China has lifted 800 million people out of poverty, and China has 3 million migrants, walk around China every year. And China has already returned 5 million returned students, contributing to this great return migration. But also, China has always has 3 million Taiwanese working in China. There's probably also 1 million Hong Kongese working in China. There's a huge domestic and international migration. China has, historically altogether has a 60 million diaspora overseas, probably the largest diaspora group in the world. And since China opened up, there's over 10 million Chinese from mainland has migrated to the different parts of the world. There's more than 5 million Chinese in the United States, 2 million in Canada, another 1 million in Australia, probably another 2 million. Huge talent network. So I think that those needs to be further studied and researched. I agree with Professor Zhang that this kind of overseas Chinese probably should be getting into this migration group, as also Yali just mentioned as well. So I think there's a broad prospect just opened up. So I think this is fascinating. We are discussing with IOM, which is the authority, leading authority on migration in China, as also Mary just mentioned about talent study as well. So I think that we want to continue this collaboration. Martin just mentioned it's great. I mean, we need to have this alliance of global talent organization. We're going to have another meeting at the Paris Peace Forum this November. We will welcome you all to attend. And also, I'm very pleased to report that our webinar this afternoon has got wide attention. We have over 240,000 on our channel, Chinese language portal. We have a simultaneous translation going on. And we have another 84,000 English viewers on that. And our staff overseas is broadcast this live on the Face and Twitch and also YouTube. So I think, it's a really one of the, probably first of this kind of a world migration report combined with Chinese reality ever produced in China. So I think this is really fascinating. I want to thank all of you for this great support. So unfortunately, I'm having another video conference. I'm already late. So I would like Martin to continue, and I want to thank Mary and Rossetti and all the other distinguished panelists very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Henry. and good luck with the next webinar. And thanks for having you, and it's an honor. Yeah.
Appreciate it. Okay, thank you.
So I interrupted briefly, and I want to bring still Professor Wen Shui-Chen in, and we have been discussing global governance, and you have been in Europe. You are now in the Australia, and you have studied also a lot of the policies related to student mobility. And what do you think comes out of this pandemic? Do we see now like a changing of policies on student mobility? And perhaps if you can talk also more generally about migration in different countries.
Thank you very much, and Martin. So first of all, I want to maybe continue discussion diasporas. I think diaspora is very important in the COVID world and post-COVID world, and particularly, in my own experience, having been a Chinese diaspora abroad, I see really they played a very important role in the COVID relief, but also in the bilateral relations. And for instance, there's a kind of saying on the internet, circulating Chinese internet, to say China played the first half of a COVID football match against COVID, and the rest of the world played the second half of the match, and the Chinese living abroad played the whole match. Because they are, at the beginning of the outbreak, many Chinese Chinese living abroad, sent face masks, including myself, to China. And the second half, we became the recipients, from our Chinese friends and colleagues. And even at the university level, we were sending, some PPE to China, but unfortunately, due to the restrictions, we couldn't send it. Then the next day, we received requests from our Chinese university saying, can they send some to us? So I think this global solidarity, that's really important. And particularly during COVID time, there's a lot of uncertainties and among, migrant communities, and also perception of migrants, and this kind of people-to-people exchange through the diaspora communities is very important. One of the video I really liked is a Chinese student studying in Italy, and he did the video, basically went on the street and put with the poster to say, I'm a human, I'm not a virus. And that was very touching, Then you see ordinary people in Italy accepted this student, not because his skin color or his nationality, but just accept as a human. I think that's the message. At the end, we're all humans, whether we're migrants, or not. And the second thing I really want to say is, as you said, on the long-term impact on student migration, an area I'm working on. And I think that's a fundamental change to look at, the current situation with US, for instance. There are a number of reasons, why, Chinese students may not study in US or study less in the US due to the visa restriction, the pandemic situation in the US. But also I see, it's growing opportunities in China, and also the opportunity for online education as well as transnational education. So that's a really phenomenon. We are seeing that, the kind of traditional study abroad may have fundamental changes to have a more hybrid model where students can study partly offline or online, offshore, partly online, onshore, or online, onshore, or a combination. And there are a number of reasons. The cost is an issue, and the safety is another issue. The politics, the international relations, bilateral relations is also an issue. And we are also, encountered with, this in certain areas like technology areas, sensitive areas, where there's a even greater restriction on the kind of the mobility of, scholars and scientists. So I think the COVID is really an important kind of dividing, moment, for many things. And even companies, some, large companies have already authorized, permanent working from home arrangement after COVID-19. So what kind of impact will be for skilled migration? Do you have to, migrate or be expatriate to work for a company abroad, and what are the future governance on this virtual transnational migration, and the migratory work will be very important. I
think this is very important what you say about also new modes of employment and new structures of employment and remote work, the pooling also of talents by companies, right, to share talent, actually, remote talent. And I think a lot of things were already, let's say, in the process, in the go, the introduction of artificial intelligence, of platforms like Zoom right now that we are using, right? And I think it's changing labor migration quite significantly now, and COVID-19 is basically the accelerant of it, right? And I think to say one very important remark here is I think it's very important how we gonna actually look at regulation and also avoid actually that talents become immersed in a global gig economy where they are totally in limbo and just freelancing for talent for companies worldwide, and it opening up actually to you know, exploitation or very low standards of employment and so on. I think so the regulation both nationally and globally are becoming very important. So I would like to very quickly have a look at some of the questions I have received, and I think some of them have been already addressed. But one question that came in for media was simply, I think I'd like to invite everyone let's say give like a 30-second short opinion. Someone was asking, how will migration look like in the future? Just very briefly, what you say. So Wei, you already said a few things. We don't start with you, so perhaps someone else who wants to jump in. Perhaps Yadi, yeah.
Okay, in the short term, I think COVID-19 impedes global mobility and makes migration more vulnerable. But in the long run, global migration and global mobility, this is the trend for the future. I think we cannot stop it. And but on the other hand, we need more endeavor to global migration governance. So that is the prospect for the global mobility or global migration, in my view. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So,
hey, Martin, I'm different. I think from the very short term, and you know, very pessimistic because of the COVID-19 and everything stopped, and even from a long term, and not only because of COVID-19, but partly because of 19, but also because the rising great power politics, the rising, populism, nationalism, and all this kind of thing is going to be a very bad influence on the migration. And if from a much longer time, from humanity, from the need of the people, I think, probably could be, optimistic. Thank you.
Professor Lu, please. Thank you.
Okay, I think it's that question is very interesting because it brings up another question I actually think about and curious about. It's how the pandemic may influence people's migration intentions and also mobility patterns in the future. So I really don't want to give a really clear answer on that. I actually can say something about, we did a small survey on Chinese returnees in Sichuan this June. And this result shows that 23% of these returnees changed their plans for future migration due to COVID-19. 20% decided to stay in Sichuan or China longer than what they intended before COVID-19 outbreak, and 3 wanted to leave Sichuan sooner because they want to go back to home to be with their family. So I think this little survey, and I think this number, the percentage will be much higher, probably in bigger cities like Beijing, Shanghai, and they have greater population of migrants. So it would be interesting to find out how that really make people think about migration.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I want to bring in Dr. McAuliffe.
Thank you very much, Martin. And I would wholeheartedly agree with all the previous speakers and really highlight that there is an opportunity, and it does depend on member states for IOM and others, governments around the world, cities and local communities, but also, and in a very uncertain and difficult geopolitical time, let's acknowledge that, but also to really point to what we are seeing in regards to COVID-19 response from the bottom up. So we are seeing, for example, stranded migrants in different parts of the world. It's certainly a core part of IOM's recovery and response kind of initiatives and its plan. But we are seeing civil society actors, local communities, families supporting people who have been stranded, whether that is stranded internally because of internal mobility restrictions, or whether that's internationally, and the support, say for example, that international students are receiving from not just their fellow members of their diaspora, but from the broader community who understand that this is a really significant pandemic that requires a whole range of responses. So while I do agree with the kind of the pessimistic outlook in terms of the broader kind of governance and global dynamic issues, of course, we can't ignore that. It would be naive to ignore that. What we can see is the real positive aspects in regards to people wanting to assist those who are most vulnerable, the internally displaced, the refugees, and people who have become stranded all over the world, whether they are international students or they're migrant workers harvesting, you know, our kind of agricultural products to deliver to people in populations all around the world. And that's not just in the so-called global north, that's also occurring in various parts of the world, in India, in Thailand, throughout Asia, throughout Latin America. So I see that there's a lot of opportunism and a lot of opportunity, more correctly, to look at the bright side and to see that there are kind of there are potentially some benefits that will come from COVID-19, but I do think it will be a long haul, and I think it will take a lot of willpower, including through the Global Compact on Migration. In many ways, we are extraordinarily lucky to have a robust framework to enable international cooperation that isn't just about member states, it's also about civil society actors and communities and academics, most importantly, certainly for my area of collaboration. It's very important for academics and applied researchers who work in the field to be having these discussions and to be really looking at crafting interventions and policy solutions that really support both migration but also migrants in different settings. Thanks.
Martin, you are muted, I think. Oh, I cannot hear.
So, sorry about that.
Okay.
At the right moment, at the wrong moment. So I think this brings us also to the end of our discussion today. And I think what is very important is this role that was just highlighted of civil society organizations, scholarly community, think tanks like CCG, hosting such important discussions together with international organizations and other entities regularly on a regularly basis. I think it's really important to promote more a discussion on migration, because it is right now also this moment, I hinted at it already, a watershed moment actually where a lot of discussions restart again, and you have a lot of countries like Canada including about the value of international migration, about what's the importance, right? And we are all around the world relaunching at some point soon. China has already admitted back a lot of foreign experts, right? Because they are highly appreciated. They are really neat. And it's in a lot of other countries right now. It's also at the stage of opening up again. And I think this is a key moment, and I think it was a really good thing to have the UN Global Compact on Migration adopted before the pandemic, right? And I think it's now really the moment to put it in place. And I think to leave it here on that note, I would like to bring in Giuseppe Rossetti to close with me that event. I would like to actually thank all the panelists, all the speakers, Dr. McAuliffe from the IOM for their participation today. And we are in a viewership of several hundred thousands of people. It's amazing. It's just 6 o'clock in the morning in Canada, so this is amazing to wake up like that. Yeah, to have such a morning. So Giuseppe, please join me and perhaps you share a few remarks to close this event.
Thank you, Martin. Just before I conclude, you asked how migration will look like post-pandemic in 30 seconds, and I'd like to answer that too. Echoing my colleague Mary's cautious optimism and Martin, your remarks on the timing of the pandemic post and not prior to the GCF, I tend to agree with all those who see the COVID-19 crisis as a wake-up call and as an opportunity to rethink how we do business and to develop strategies for building better. Well-governed migration can indeed be a transformative pathway for achieving this. Now, back to my closing remarks, and as we have reached the end of the program, I would like to express IOM's appreciation to Dr. Wang and the World CCG for the excellent preparation and delivery of yet another successful event in their long series of webinars that week after week continue to provide us all with unique opportunities for insightful exchanges on various topics, many of which are relevant to migration and mobility issues. The World Migration Report is only one of many examples of IOM CCG long-standing collaboration. But I also wish to thank Dr. Geiger for being our moderator today, a job Dr. Geiger is not new to and that he performs with impeccable mastery and Swiss law. Dr. Geiger possesses indeed a wealth of migration knowledge and experience and a genuine interest in China's developments. If you found, as I did, today's event of interest, is largely due to our distinguished panelists and speakers, whom I sincerely thank for making time to share their perspective with us today on a very important and timely issue, migration. And they show the way on how to make the most of a publication like the World Migration Report. And then finally, a note of thanks goes to our interpreters and to the nearly 300,000 online and national and international participants who have chosen to stay with us today and connect from different parts of the world and different time zones. I believe a video recording of this webinar will also be made available later on for those who could not join us. Once again, on behalf of IOM and on behalf of Dr. Wang at CCG, who had to step out, thank you and wish you all a very productive rest of the day. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, and everyone for joining and participating and helping with this webinar. This closes our official launch of the World Migration Report in Chinese edition and our discussion on the challenges and opportunities of global migration. Thank you so much for attending.
Thanks, Martin.